Hey everyone, Ripley Sellers with Bob's Watches. I'm here in the studio with Justin for another episode of Vintage of the Week, where we pull aside one remarkable timepiece and share with you exactly why we love it. Well, Justin, we got a fun one here today, but first,
classic,
as always,
right?
Yeah, a classic. A quick wrist check. What are you wearing?
Let's get right into it. Not messing around. Basic, no date sub, one of my favorites.
Put a four-liner.
Yeah, 4-line. I mean, it's about as classic as you can get. We're talking about a Submariner today, so I thought I would bring out one of my favorites. And you know me, I'm one that I prefer the no date to the date almost always. So yeah, I got the nod today. What are you wearing?
Yeah, that's a cool one too. It's literally the last of the aluminum bezel no dates. You got the four-liner, the inner bezel engraving. I'm also wearing a no date sub, but the current, 124060 41 mil no date. Very different watch than what you're wearing and what we're talking about today, but kind of cool.
Yeah, we got kind of a little timeline. Most recently we got here, and we got to the beginning of it all. Let's get right into it. We got a 5512 Submariner.
Yeah, so I think when we're talking about vintage subs, I mean, the 5512 is usually the model that everyone wants. Like, that is the de facto choice. If you could only have one vintage sub, it's usually a 5512.
Sure.
Came out in 59. Not by no means is it the first sub, but it does mark the point when it grew to 40 mil, got crown guards, and the sub really started to take on its contemporary form.
Exactly. It's the first sub that kind of feels like today's subs and like how it's been since that release, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like a pre-crown guard like James Bond, that's a grail watch, and most diehard collectors would rather probably have that. But when you're just getting a vintage sub, if you could only choose one, to me the 5512 reads far more like a vintage Submariner than anything that predated it.
It does.
And then, of course, it's near identical to the 5513, but the main difference here is that it's got a chronometer certified movement. The 5513 didn't.
Right.
And to reflect that, you get 4 lines of text on the lower half, just like the one you're wearing or the one I'm wearing, versus 2 lines like the 5513. So this isn't the gilt dial version. So this is, I believe this one came in the early 70s, like 1972 or 1973, thereabouts this one is.
Right.
The model itself came out in 59 and stayed in production right until the end of the 70s. And so right around 67 is when you see that transition from gilt dials to matte dials. And so this is the later variety, the matte dials.
Yeah.
But just a really, really clean example.
I love the matte dial too. Yeah, and we talk about the 5512 where you say that's the sub you want, right? I mean, between this and the 5513, they're very, very similar watches, right? Like you said, there's just, a little bit of dial text and some movement, but the 5512 is a lot more rare, right? In that sense, it makes it a lot more desirable and also more expensive. So I think this is a great example to pick up. For me, I just love the look of this one. We talk about the gilt dials and the matte. I love the matte personally. It screams vintage. It has that nice look where it's black, but it's not that super deep black. It almost looks a little faded. It probably lost a little color over time, but when you see it, it feels vintage. And then, this is a perfect example with, the patina on the markers and hands and the bezel, all of it for me has just kind of aged perfectly. This is almost like my perfect patinaing, aging Submariners, this example right here. Yeah,
it's a really pretty one. I'm torn whether I like the gilt or matte better. Obviously, there's a massive delta in price when you're just talking about a dial variant. But for when you've got a really pretty patina like this, where it matches on the dial and hands, nice and symmetrical, I think I might prefer the matte dial. I think the all-white text and that kind of flat surface creates a better neutral backdrop and really lets you appreciate the color versus a gilt dial where you have those warmer accents on the dial surface itself.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a really, really clean example. Look how faded that bezel is relative to, that originally started its life black.
Yes.
Black.
Yeah. So that was my next point, where I love the color of the bezel, but even more so than that, I love how it's aged in terms of the fading of the color combined with the condition. So a lot of times you see these and it has that beautiful color. It's faded to like a gray or blue almost, but then it's really beat up, or it's gone too far where you almost can't even read the numbers. This one, aside from the fading in color, the condition is really nice. It's got a couple little nicks here and there, but for a watch of this age, that bezel's in really good shape.
Yeah, 100%. It's faded to scratch ratio.
Exactly.
It's very, very well done here,
and I appreciate that.
Yeah, and it's a good, honest watch. Based on the years, this is a later era bracelet from the 80s, which is completely normal for these. I think the original bracelet on this would have been one of those folded link ones, which is you know, in my opinion, this is a superior bracelet.
I like it too, and I know it's not, you know, if you're looking for the period correct or the exact bracelet that came with it, this obviously isn't going to do it for you. But outside of that, for me, I like the bracelet a lot better. I think it just feels better. I think it wears a little bit better. And it doesn't bother me that it's not the exact bracelet that it originally came with. For me, I think, like you said, it's a little bit of an upgrade. It's still a Rolex bracelet. It's still a vintage Rolex bracelet. So I have no problems with that. I actually kind of prefer it.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same mentality. You know, the folded link bracelets are my least favorite style. You know, the rivet ones are kind of cool for the vintage vibe. They're very lightweight feeling. Obviously, the solid ones, like on the watch I'm wearing, feel fantastic. But the folded ones are kind of neither here nor there for me. Yes, they're definitively vintage, but I just associate that style of bracelet with just kind of lower quality ones.
Yeah.
And they didn't last very long either. That's why that one wore out after, what, a decade or so, and then you're onto this one.
Yeah.
So I honestly, if I'm thinking of a 5512, I'm either going to get one just like this, or I'd go as early as you can get, you know, square crown guards, maybe even a 2-liner or something like that, gilt dial. But for someone who's just looking for a quintessential vintage sub, this is a really great one to pick up. And for all the other people, you kind of alluded to it earlier, it's quite a bit more rare than the 5513. And it's just those 2 little extra lines of text on the dial for those in the know. But simply due to the fact that they were offered alongside each other for so many years, more people got the cheaper option, the 5513, and so production of this wrapped up before the end of the 70s, whereas, you know, the 5513 went almost a full decade later. So yeah, it's kind of a little bit of inside baseball as far as vintage subs, but at the same time, at a quick glance, immediately identifiable as a vintage sub. And then just the way this one's aged. The sub should be a black and white watch. This, you get kind of yellows and blues in there, and that's kind of a really cool thought.
It's nice. It's a nice look to it, and you know, we talk about this all the time, how vintage watches are kind of all one of a kind, right? Like none of them age exactly the same. I mean, barring ones that just get put in a safety deposit box and they're pretty much new old stock. Everything else kind of has its own character and its own life to it. And I think that's a great point with this one. I had mentioned earlier, this is almost my perfect vintage aging combination. I love the color of the patina. That's something that's very subjective too, right? Like some people like that really burnt dark orange patina. Some people like it, you know, really light, a little more cream colored. This one for me is almost perfect. And you know, we talk about that because this watch is actually for sale, right? We always talk about watches that are for sale. So if this one resonates with you, it's something that you can add to your collection as of whenever this video goes live. This watch will be for sale on Bob's Watches. So yeah, if you're looking for a great 5512 with my opinion, a beautiful, beautiful patina and age on it, this one definitely deserves a look.
Oh, 100%. I like my vintage watches to look vintage, and when you compare this to a modern no-date sub, I mean, the differences are immediately apparent here. And I mean, even compared to the subsequent generation, like the one you're wearing, where you still have an aluminum bezel and 40 mil case, I mean, at a glance, one of these looks old, one of these
exactly.
The other two look quite a bit more modern. But this is sort of a trio of chronometer certified no-date subs, and that's a legacy that dates all the way back to 59 and then up until the present day.
Yeah, this is a good one.
Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Vintage the Week. Beautiful matte dial 5512 Submariner. As always, I'm Ripley, this is Justin. Don't forget to tune in next week and we'll have another watch for you then.